Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our LinkedIn Live, which I believe is actually our 6th episode. Can't believe we've been doing these for 6 months. And how cute was the snow, guys, at the beginning on that video that marketing did just for this month? Feeling very Christmassy.
I like the swing.
It's wrong way.
You've got a Christmas pudding. Maria's got a Rudolph mug. I have absolutely nothing. I'm really embarrassed. I'm very sorry. Although if you could maybe see the floor, you'd see a lot of presents that need wrapping this week in the build up to Christmas. So I do promise it is Christmassy here. Right. Well, thanks, guys, for joining me today. We thought it'd be a great idea just to wrap up the year and kind of review what's happened in the US this year. So we've got 30 minutes to whistle through a lot of information. But we're going to try and be succinct as we possibly can. If anyone watching has any questions, if you're watching live, just pop them in the comments box. If you're watching this back after it's took place and maybe you think of a question, then don't hesitate to reach out to me, Maria, or Will on LinkedIn, and we'll happily answer any questions after the episode. So today, as I said, what we really want to do is wrap up the year before Christmas and just talk through a couple of key things that have happened in the US. So we're going to have a little look at the size of the market this year, you know, what the value of that market has been, how much it has grown in this last year, and then specifically look at the staffing temp market and look at the value of that. We're also going to cover off specific sectors and locations. So where we at PGC have seen growth. So looking at the top states for business, looking at where the growing tech hubs are and where the opportunity might be for next year. And then just have a little look at temporary staffing and what the value of certain industries are in there. And then we're going to come on to some changes in employment law and the landscape for next year that may impact some of you in terms of how you operate in the States. We're not going to be able to cover off all the changes. This is the US, it's highly complex, there's always changes, but we do have an employment blog on our website for both the US and Canada if you want to look into some of the detail of some of the things that we are going to discuss today after the episode has been aired. And then very lastly, we're going to wrap up with what we see as the trends for 2023. So what really are some of the projections for the market in this next year, and then tell you how you can get involved in that early in January. So that's pretty much what we're going to run through. Will, Maria, are you guys prepared? Have you got your tea, coffee, ready for a little chat together?
Yeah. One thing you did miss out is that Will's going to tell us at the end the fun fact about the US.
Will, I just need to let everyone know Will is full of like the most bizarre facts, you know, wherever we are, whatever we're doing, I'm learning every day. But Will, go on, you share one and then we'll see if anyone can guess in the comments whilst we're out.
So rather than a fact, I've got a Christmas US themed quiz question for everybody. So I want your guesses in the comments and we'll see who gets it right. So no Googling, obviously, because we can't see you either. So no cheating. We want to know which president banned Christmas trees from the White House. So put your guesses in the comments and we'll reveal at the end.
Okay. Maria, should we hazard a little guess now?
I know.
My gut says Trump, but then Melania.
Yeah.
I don't think Melania would stand for no Christmas trees.
No, definitely not the Obamas. I feel like they would have 12 Christmas trees.
Oh yeah, they'd go all out, the Obamas, definitely. Are you running out of presidents, Maria?
Yeah, and that's me done.
Okay.
Have some more who's on there.
George Washington. Yeah, okay, George Washington. Okay, well, if anyone does think they can guess, they can put it in the comments. If you also like quizzes, we'll put one on LinkedIn on Friday, which is really difficult. I struggled with it, but yeah, it's pretty cool. Okay, right, let's get on with the content because we've got a lot to get into. So first of all, we said we'd look at the market, you know, what the valuation of that is and how that's changed over the course of this past year. Well, it was predicted at the beginning of the year that the staffing revenue in the US was to reach a record level, which it has. It has tipped at $212 billion, or just under 213 billion. Who's counting when you're in the billions? Which is a 13% increase from when it was projected to hit a record high in May 2022. So it's surpassed even what the market projections were. So there's been huge, unprecedented growth this past year. And how that is broken down is we've got 188 billion in the temporary staffing industry, so where the contractors and freelancers live. And then in the perm, so place and search, we've got $24.4 billion. So absolutely huge. And by the end of the year, we're expecting that the temp staffing market will have increased year on year by a huge 12%. So massive growth this last year, and we've definitely seen that amongst our clients who work with PGC, that we've seen that some of the sectors that they operate in have had huge growth, and there's been a huge demand for contingent labour. We were reading a report by Statistica not long ago that predicted by the end of 2027, 50% of all the workforce in the US will be contingent. So huge opportunity happening in the US right now. But I thought it might just be helpful, Maria, maybe would you mind sharing what some of those top industries have been on the contract side, and maybe what it was projected to be this year, and what the year-on-year growth in revenue has been?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the staffing segment, we've got IT and tech, which is sat right at the top with a projected value to reach 41.7 billion this year. Just looking on year growth, that is a projected growth of 16%.
Wow.
I think what's really interesting to think of as well is, like, last year, having come out of the back of COVID, we saw huge growth. So for it to have continued into 2022, like, it really is slowing down. So 16% year on year is just huge.
So and then, did you say, sorry, 42 billion in tech?
Yeah, just under.
Just under. And the UK whole recruitment market's worth 51 billion. So kind of put it into perspective, just how big the tech industry in particular is right across the United States.
Yeah, and it is phenomenal. And we've actually got some great reports as well. If anyone watching is in tech, obviously tech covers a huge market in terms of industry specifics and niches. So we've got great reports as well. So feel free to reach out to just see a further breakdown into tech. Following the IT and tech sector, we've got finance and accounting, which accounted for is projected to account for 9.3 billion. So just over $9 billion. And again, that has grown year on year 12%. So huge growth again. Following that, we've got life sciences, which we're continuing to see kind of grow steadily year on year. So this year, it's going to account for $3.7 billion of the market and 5% year on year growth. And then followed by that, we've got the marketing and creative space, which is making up for 2.3 billion with 12% year on year growth again. So everything is just growing, and you know, they are big numbers when the values are already so high.
Yeah.
To see them be growing by a few billion year on year is just huge.
Yeah, definitely. I think as well as looking at the sectors and the growth that we've had there, I know we always talk about think of America as if you're entering 50 countries, or you're certainly operating in 50 countries. So it's important we look at the state performance as well. And ASA reported that the top 5 states with the highest staffing revenues this year have been California, which is probably no surprise, Texas, which surpassed New York, who were in 3rd place, followed by Florida. You know, we've seen a lot of growth in Florida this year, not only with kind of talent moving into that space, but also with staffing agencies setting up on the state of Florida as well. You know, you've got Miami, Tampa, all popular areas where recruitment businesses are basing themselves. And then in 5th, we've got Illinois. So they're the top 5 states. So we've gone through the kind of core sectors and the states as well. Well, just over on kind of what we've seen internally in PGC, what are some of the observations that you've noticed this last year?
It's really interesting because a lot of what you just mentioned there from the overall market is actually what we're seeing reflected on our side as well. So for companies that we're partnering with that are placing workers across the US, we've also seen Texas overtake New York. So Texas is our second most popular state for business as well. So that's an interesting trend. And then as well as that kind of growth of Florida too. So for us, Florida and North Carolina are kind of the best of the rest after Florida, Texas and New York. No, after New York, Texas, and California. And they're both kind of fourth and fifth respectively. I feel like I'm doing top of the pops, up one spot is Florida and North Carolina.
One more one.
And but then some of the other markets that you mentioned too, that there's a lot of kind of growth in it, especially in terms of year-on-year stats are Illinois that you mentioned, obviously being the fifth biggest market in general in the US. We saw a 12% increase last year in placements made with us in Illinois. But the one that's kind of had the fastest growth out of all of them by far is one that we're hearing more and more about, which is Tennessee, which is one of the ones that really is kind of an up-and-comer, really under the radar market that a lot of people aren't aware of or aren't focused on.
Yeah.
And it went from 19th out of all the 50 states for us last year up to 12th. So just missed out on a top 10 spot. But that had a 26% increase in workers that we saw placed in that state this year compared to last year. So that is a really kind of up-and-coming market. There's a lot of reasons for that. We've got a blog on our website that highlights Tennessee and the reasons behind that too, which is really interesting. And it is a really kind of emerging market for quite a lot of different sectors. So it's a really interesting one to have a think about if you're not already considering.
Yeah, it's definitely a state to keep an eye on. I think their economy grew by 8.6%. In this last year, and it was one of the highest growth rates across the state. So it is definitely, a state to watch. One of the other initiatives that's actually happening in the state to attract businesses to it is the state government of Tennessee give 2 years free tuition for high school graduates. So you've got a lot of young emerging talent out there, which could probably be tapped up as some great recruiters in the state. But yeah, there's also kind of tax incentives happening in Tennessee. So 0% on personal income tax. So again, they're just definitely trying to attract more business to the states. To their state. That's a definite. So no surprise that Tennessee is featured on that list. Thanks, Will. That was really great. So if we just break down then the temp staffing industry now by sector and have a little look at what some of those revenues are that have been generated. And really, we've taken a look at Staffing Industry Analysts' Geographical Atlas of 2022. We love the guys at SIA. Their information is just so insightful, and we conduct a lot of market research with those guys. But Maria, do you want to talk through just some context about those four industries we spoke about earlier, and maybe what they generated last year and what they've actually generated this year, and some of the top states for those sectors as well, for anyone listening who is currently placing roles in one of those four?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we start again with your IT and tech revenue. So in 2021, IT and tech revenue reached $35.9 billion, so just under $36 billion. It is forecasted at the end of this year to reach just under $42 billion. So huge growth again in a year. And if we were to just break that down in top states, we've got Texas at number one, followed by California, and then Illinois that we've just touched on as well. So I think, Amy, what you've mentioned of really breaking down the states is really important when you're looking at kind of entering the market and really doing that kind of fact-finding mission to see kind of what your industry state specific growth and kind of value is.
It's kind of crazy, isn't it, now that Texas is the number one state for tech roles in the contract side? Always dominated by California. So the fact that that's tipped the scales is definitely reflective of what we've been seeing with our clients and where they're generating the most revenue when they're working in the tech sector.
Yeah, definitely. And then if we move on to marketing, so marketing revenue for last year accounted for $2 billion US dollars, $2 billion dollars. And then we have seen it grow in 2022 to $2.3 billion. So again, huge growth in just a short space of a year. In terms of breaking down those states for the marketing side, you've got California, placed number 1, followed by New York, and then Texas again. So again, really popular states. And just to note on this will be where we're seeing the onboards being placed, so where the talent is located. So obviously post-COVID as well, we saw a lot of talent migrate across the US with kind of flexible working coming into place. Yeah. Then life sciences in 2021, we had $3.6 billion worth of revenue. In 2022, that's projected to reach $3.7 billion. So again, just growing year on year. Top states for life sciences, we've got California taking up $803 million in California, and then that is followed by New Jersey and Massachusetts. I'm so glad I managed to say that. I never say Massachusetts, right? I'm like, Massachusetts. And then last but not least, with our finance sector in 2021 reached 8.3 billion, a casual $1 billion in growth. That's looking to reach 9.3 billion in 2022, with our top states there being California and Florida. So huge growth year on year. And I think, again, just to realize that is on top of the massive growth we saw from 2020 to 2021. The market is really just getting bigger and bigger. And the US, is at the forefront with that market size global revenue.
Yeah, definitely. Brill. I think it's always important when we're talking about the US just to look at kind of the economical, political and employment backdrop. We know that the annual inflation rate has receded quite recently and actually hit a rate that's been the most favourable since January this year. So whilst the country is still under inflationary pressure, like every other country in the world, their trend is the most favourable. And then politically, when we just look at what's been going on, we've had the midterm elections, and yeah, I enjoyed getting to know all about this this past year. The midterm elections were voting for the Senate, the House of Representatives and state governors. And what came out with that was the Republicans took back the House of Representatives from the Democrats, which means next year it's likely to see some chance now of new legislation coming through. So that's something that we'll be certainly monitoring very closely and updating our clients on. And yeah, the Democrats have retained control of the Senate by taking the state of Pennsylvania. See, Maria, I'm like you, Massachusetts. Pennsylvania that's my Pennsylvania from Republicans. So, just politically, there's been a little bit of a shift and movement since the midterm elections, and we would expect that would start to filter through, certainly for next year. So watch this space, we'll be monitoring that closely. But Maria, in terms of employment growth, what's been happening in the US on that front?
Yeah, so obviously, based on those kind of figures we've just run through, there has been growth in pretty much every major sector across the US, although it has been somewhat concentrated. So there's 4 categories that actually accounted for 47% of the employment growth. So we've got manufacturing, we've got professional and business services, healthcare and social assistance has always been quite high up there, but again, it's continuing to grow, and leisure and hospitality. So job markets are continuing to perform better than expected. I think as we actually entered Q4 this year, there were over 200,000 jobs added to the market. So again, just no signs of showing down.
Yeah, it's interesting. Healthcare, social assistance continued that growth post-COVID, but also leisure and hospitality has completely bounced back from COVID, which is great. Will, I mentioned before, some kind of employment and compliance updates for next year. One of the big topics we see a lot of discussion on, because this impacts recruiters no matter if they're in contract or perm, is around pay transparency. Do you want to talk us through what some of the changes are of that and what anyone listening needs to think about?
Yeah, absolutely. So pay transparency, for anyone that doesn't know, is essentially basically just trying to the whole goal of it is to make everything as easy as possible for candidates, so to make things as transparent as possible. So what that means for the states that there's been updates to the legislation for is that now if you are posting an internal or an external job posting, even if you are a business using a recruitment service, so if you're a recruiter, you also need to be doing this as well, is you need to be advertising a minimum and a maximum salary range on every job post that you do. And some of the states that already do this are California and Colorado. One of the big ones that joined them in November this year was New York. Yeah. So if you are operating in any of those markets, you need to read up on the pay transparency legislation because, like I said, if Amy mentioned, if you're making contract or permanent placements, you need that minimum and a maximum on there. You can't just kind of put the, something plus or, competitive, which everybody hates on LinkedIn anyway. So hopefully you're not competitive salary. But so there's some of the other markets. And really we tend to see as well that New York and California particularly are some of the more employee focused states that when those states pass legislation that kind of are more employee friendly, they're often the first few dominoes to fall, and then more and more states then do fall suit. So currently going through some of the political conversations at the minute, they'll probably up for vote later this year, are Washington Massachusetts and South Carolina. So they're already looking at them. Washington as well, which might be sort of a state that people need to pay attention to, especially if you're in tech, because you've got Seattle up there. That they, as of January the 1st, they are bringing that in as well. So the same as New York and Rhode Island too, as well in the northeast, they are bringing salary transparency in too. California are basically already got it in place, but they're making theirs more strict as of next year. So again, if you work in California, you're probably well versed in every year you need to read up on a different legislation changes because it happens all the time and it's only going to get more complicated. So but yeah, that's basically pay transparency, and then some of the key markets that you do need to be doing this in already, and then also the ones you need to be keeping an eye on if you're operating in those markets as well.
Yeah, definitely. I was just chuckling away internally then because there's always much debate about salary postings on job adverts. And someone, mentioned recently when we were talking about this, when someone will advertise a post and the salary is competitive, and he said, if it's that competitive, tell us what it is. You can't, if you're not telling us what it is yet, and it causes so many issues, we know. But it, interestingly, just drawing on what you were saying there, we always talk about the US as a much more transparent market generally when it comes to managing contractors, in terms of how you advertise the pay rate, what they see on their pay slip, in terms of state governments controlling what happens to that contractor. A lot of those things in the UK are controlled by the end client. So it's definitely a much more transparent market. I totally agree with that, and you can see the legislation just consistently edging more and more towards that way. Maria, I know you talked about employment growth, but just because we're talking about salaries, do you have anything on pay rates for this year?
Yeah, definitely. So I think on the contract side, average earnings hourly went up 4.5% in October. Year on year, and that is actually the smallest increase we've seen, so still to be just under 5% and it be one of the lowest increase you're seeing. They are again just growing, and I think even recruiters doing perm recruitment in the States, they'll always say, a role here that would be 80k, I'm placing for 120k in the US. So salaries in the US do typically tend to be higher, and then obviously you've got that tied with your higher fees, you're getting much higher results in terms of placements. In terms of our own internal data, obviously we sit on a huge amount of data all across the US. We've seen average pay rates consistently increasing from, pre-COVID. So majority of our contract roles are your white collar desk-based roles. And the predominant industries that we've witnessed are, again, your IT, your life sciences, finance, and we're seeing higher pay rates increase. So just if we looked at kind of average hourly rates, back in 2020, we would have seen about $62.50 an hour. We're now seeing it up at kind of $67 an hour. So increasing year on year, which is fantastic. to see. And obviously that just in turn means you guys being able to charge higher rates and margins.
Yeah, brilliant. So as I mentioned earlier, there's quite a few updates in there just around compliance. So we do have the employment blog that's available on our website. So if you want to take a further peek or a more detailed look, because we haven't covered everything, we haven't got enough time to do that today, but you can have a look on our website for that. And as I say, just reach out to us with any questions. Right, guys, so to wrap up the session, I thought we could just spend a couple of minutes looking at 2023. I shared this recently with, a room of recruitment founders that there's a lot of doom and gloom right now in the market and a lot of hesitancy. And I think that was really spurred on by the mass layoffs, particularly in the tech sector. But when we look at the US and the growth that's expected for next year, it's certainly not a declining market. The market as a whole for staffing is expected to grow by another 2% in 2023. So anyone who's already operating in the US, you're actually today operating in the biggest market in the world. But next year, it will be even bigger than it is this year. So the opportunity is not depleting, it's growing year on year. And that growth next year is classed as moderate growth. We've obviously gone through a few years now of high growth, but as I said, the market is not decreasing, it's actually increasing, just at a more moderate growth rate that's to be expected at this point in time. In terms of contract market compared to this year, next year, the market's projected to be worth $191 billion. And place and search is expected to contribute $25.6 billion. So again, both sides growing moderately and expected to grow in 2023. Will, do you have any stats on those top four industries in terms of what their projected growth might be for next year?
Yeah, absolutely. So those same four industries and sectors that Maria mentioned before, so IT, finance, accounting, life sciences, marketing. So you mentioned it before, Amy, when you think about it, so the IT sector in general for contract is projected to move to about 45 billion, which when you think about the UK market last year generated about 51 billion in total from the staffing industry. Just the IT temporary staffing side of things in the US alone is 45 billion. And that's projected to grow to that number, which is an 8% growth. So you think like it's already, like you mentioned, the biggest market in the world. It's already the biggest sector and the biggest market in the world. And it's still projected to be the highest growing sector as well, or one of the highest growing sectors. Yeah. So it's kind of just like mind blowing. And then a lot of those other sectors as well are still projected to have really good growth as well. So you mentioned that the market in general is supposed to kind of grow by about 2%, maybe that moderate growth, whereas finance and accountancy is another 7%. Marketing is about 8% growth as well, and life sciences is supposed to grow by about 5% too. So all of those figures that Maria mentioned earlier when she was talking about the markets, they are all getting bigger next year or projected to. And as you mentioned in May, this was supposed to be the record year, and that was smashed by another 13%. So, realistically, those figures are probably going to be outdated by about February once the recruiters start getting going next year. So, one of the things that everybody says to us, is have I missed the boat? Am I too late? Like it must be getting saturated by now. But you're in the biggest market in the world already, and it is only getting bigger, and it's the demand is far outstripping the supply. So just to kind of encourage everybody when they're going into 2023, it's really just going to be more of the same.
Yeah, definitely. So we always say there's no better time to enter the market, but really 2023, there's going to be no better time to enter the market, which is why at the beginning of the year, we are delivering a US expansion clinic day. And this is taking place on Thursday, January the 5th. So if on your business goals for next year is to look at, explore or do a US expansion plan and actually implement it, then this would be the session for you. They are 30-minute one-to-one sessions with one of our US expansion consultants. You can ask any questions about the US market or expansion. We'll give you lots of information on the landscape, so a lot more detail than what we've gone in today. And we will also look at any industry specific information. If you're recruiting in an industry we've not mentioned today, then we'll look at that for you. The places are limited on that clinic though, and I'm not just saying that, really they are. We've already had a lot taken. So if you do want to book your slot, then reach out to one of us after the show, or head over to our LinkedIn profiles, because you'll definitely be able to see information on them about that day. Now, before we finish, because we are wrapping up now, we're at our 30-minute deadline. Will, do you want to reveal who the president is that banned Christmas trees from the White House?
So you have 46 to choose from. So it's not like, but then the correct answer is Theodore Teddy Roosevelt. And my favorite story about Teddy Roosevelt, so you get a bonus fact as well about him, is he was once given a speech, was shot by a would-be assassin. And while the guy was getting dragged away by security, Teddy Roosevelt stayed up there and finished the rest of his speech before going to get treatment. So that is just a really, really cool story.
Wow. Okay. Carried on. Being shot, that's the ultimate service, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. So now we know Roosevelt was also the Grinch. So thanks for sharing that, Will. Anyway, that's all we've got time for today. Thank you for listening, and thank you so much for your support if you've been watching our episodes this year. We wish everyone listening, or anyone who watches this back, an absolutely amazing Christmas. We hope you have a lovely time over the holiday season, and we'll look forward to working with you or talking to you next year. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.